I'm talking about all gender identities. We don't cherry pick who gets to get free. It's all of us or none.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Black and Excellent, where we talk about all things Black and excellent. Today we have with us Omisade Burney-Scott, who is the creator and curator of the Black Girls Survival Guide to Menopause. Let's jump right in. I'd love to learn more about who you are and what you do.
Who I am. I always like to answer this question kind of with who claims me and who I claim. So I'll start there. So who claims me are Southern Black folk. So I'm a seventh generation North Carolinian on both my mother and father's side. So I'm definitely a Black Southern person. I also think who claims me are social justice movement folks. I have never worked in corporate America. I've always done work around social justice. And so that means I've worked in nonprofits since I was 27, 28, and I'm 56. So it's been quite a while. Also, it's looked like me doing work that's focused on different justice or liberation issues for the Black community. So like economic justice, racial justice, gender justice, reproductive justice. That work is, I think, in alignment with like my purpose and why I'm here. I think who also claim me are my children. I have two really, really beautiful sons, one who is 31 and one who is about to be 15. Who I claim are people who are co-conspirators in liberation, like anybody who is focused on the liberation of marginalized communities, and I claim you. I especially claim you when you're really clear and moving with a grounded political analysis around systemic oppression and how that impacts our community and what's necessary for us all to get free. So I don't cherry pick who in the Black community gets free. I mean, all of us. So that means I'm talking about who you are as a Black person diasporically. I'm talking about all gender identities. I'm talking about all sexuality. I'm talking about if you're neurodivergent, if you're differently abled, if you are unhoused, if you're poor, if you're formerly incarcerated. I mean, everybody. Yeah. So we don't cherry pick who gets to get free. It's all of us or none. I am an Aries sun, Leo moon, Virgo rising, so I get stuff done and I have a good time while I do it. Black Girls Guide to Surviving Menopause was birthed in 2019, and it continues to evolve as this really potent intergenerational disruptor of narratives around who is menopausal, when they will be menopausal, and how they will experience it. So that's my long answer of who I am.
You mentioned that you have held spaces in the social justice arena. How does your work now fit into that history?
Our work is focused primarily on culture and narrative shift work, which inherently is social justice work. And we're doing that by centering the voices of Black women, trans, and gender expansive people. And the way that we do that is through storytelling. We think about storytelling as a pathway to advocacy and policy change. And so our kind of corner of the menopause landscape or ecosystem that continues to grow, it's definitely right now feels like it's moving from just kind of this momentary conversation to the connective movement that has already been in place around reproductive justice, that's already been in place around bodily autonomy, that's already been in place about body sovereignty. What we're doing is we're expanding the dialogue so that it also includes aging and menopause, because you don't fall off a cliff when you become a menopausal person. The issues around agency, the issues around your body, feeling at home inside your body, feeling like you're being supported, feeling like you understand what's happening with your body and how that translates to your identities, your relationships, your roles, all of those things. We're just pulling the through line in a much more intentional way. And so our work is grounded in a couple of ethoses. The first one is the Black radical feminist ethos. We believe that any of the change that we want to see happen as relates to menopause and aging for Black women, trans, and gender expansive people should be led by those people, and that anybody else who wants to support that, who are other people of color or who are white accomplices, then that's great. But you need to follow our lead. You need to center our stories and our experiences, our truths, our needs, and then we can figure out like how that impacts the broader community. Because if you center those, actually is beneficial for everybody, because that opens up a space to a much more honest, diverse, full-throated dialogue, that's not necessarily what's happening. And then another ethos for us is intergenerational work. It's critical for us to have these intergenerational conversations because we know that menopause is not a spontaneous event. It's actually the ending of your menstrual cycle. So if you think about, women or people who are assigned women at birth, or, people who have uteruses and ovaries, like menopause is when your period stops.
Mm-hmm.
So your menopause story actually begins with your period and it ends with menopause. So sometimes I think the way that society problematizes women's bodies and our experiences with our bodies, like it chops us up into little compartmental boxes. So it's like, this is your experience with your period. This is your experience with sex. This is your experience with potentially having children, if you want children, because some people don't want children or can't have children. And then this is your experience with aging. And then this is your experience with getting older. And then that's your experience with death and dying. And it's all kind of chopped up, as opposed to being this continuous exploration and continuous evolution, this like very iterative experience that helps you again think about, who am I? Am I happy? Am I at home inside my body? Are my relationships healthy? Am I doing work that brings me joy? Am I safe? Do I know how to keep myself safe? Are the people who I'm in relationship keeping me safe? And how do I also like do things that expand the way I see myself and see the world, things that are adventurous and different and creative and cultural. So all of that is integrated in that intergenerational ethos. And then our third ethos is partnership. We're very clear that we can't do everything and we don't want to. It's unnecessary. And so whenever I meet somebody who is a jack of all trades, I'm like, that's interesting. You're doing a lot. How's that feel? You all right? You good? Like, I feel like it's important for people to lean into the thing that's your thing, be like, that's my thing. I'm good at that. Some things I am not good at. I've learned a lot about that, Chi, with this podcast. I'm like, there's some things that go along with podcasting and storytelling and gatherings that I'm not interested in doing. But then I partner with folk who are interested in doing that, who really love that, and also who can teach me. Like, I want to have an appreciation for it. I want to respect it, but it's not necessary that it's become something that I also have an expertise in. I don't think that's always necessary for us to do. So those are kind of like the three things that really ground our work.
How did you learn about menstruation, and how did that transition into your knowledge of menopause and potentially how you stumbled into this kind of work?
My mom was a registered nurse. My mother was actually an older mom. A lot of my friends' parents were boomers. My mother wasn't a boomer. My mother was born in 1930 and had me when she was 37 and had my sister when she was 38. And so she did a lot of work with my younger sister and I to kind of like get us prepared for our periods. She was, there was conversation, and in our house, this is in the 70s as well. But I also feel like at that time, across the nation and in public schools, there was a much more robust sex education program that then like basically came to a screeching halt during the Reagan administration. And you can see now where we are, like our public schools are at such great risk of like kids not even knowing history, let alone knowing about their bodies. I felt like there was a nice combination of what my mom shared with us and also what we were getting in school. So I felt like I was fairly prepared. I was also a little obsessed with Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Like, I read that book probably about 100 times, to the point when finally there was the Scholastic Book Fair. My mother was like, I'm buying you and your sister a copy of this book because I'm tired of having to pay this 25-cent late fee because y'all still got this book at the house. When my period started, I was like, oh, okay. I knew this was going to happen. I felt prepared. I did not feel the same way about menopause, for a few reasons. One, my mother passed away when I was 31, so I didn't get the benefit of having a conversation with her as an older woman. And I do often think about what conversations we would have, because we had a very close relationship. I think sometimes I share things that she would rather not know. She used to say, I'm so glad you feel comfortable sharing these things with me. And sometimes I really wish you wouldn't. But I felt like I could say anything to her and she'd be like, oh, okay, well, okay. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm like, okay, mommy, I love you. And she's like, oof, this girl. I learned about menopause as a young person by observation. You know, my mom, so she has sisters of the heart, chosen sisters. Her best friends who used to come and visit our family, and they would stay the night and they would talk about the change. And that's how I knew what menopause was. But in my mind, it lived in a box. It lived inside of the change box. It lived inside of hot flashes. It lived inside of night sweats. But there was no intentional conversation to say, what we're experiencing right now, little girl, you're going to experience in a few years. And I had a menstrual cycle for 34 years. And then when that started to shift and change, it didn't dawn on me what was happening. I was just like, something weird is going on with my period. It's in my late 30s. Mm-hmm. And then I experienced a pregnancy loss at 40. And when I had the miscarriage, my OBGYN said, this is not uncommon for perimenopausal people to have a miscarriage. And I was like, this is new language. What is that? And it felt like I was ready for menopause to be here. But there's like a whole spectrum of experiences. And perimenopause felt like the pregame that I didn't know anything about. And that the pregame can actually last quite a bit of time. It depends on the individual, but it can last anywhere from 5 to 8 years. And some people have physical symptoms while they're perimenopausal and some people don't. Like, it's just like, it really depends on the individual. And then you are not considered menopausal until you have not had a menstrual cycle for 1 full calendar year. That means 12 consecutive months. So say, for example, you had no period for 9 months and you're like, I am menopausal. I've made it. Ooh, you're about to celebrate. You're about to throw out all of your sanitary products. You can be like white outfit like Lisa Ray every day.
Yes, right? Right. Yes.
Every day. I'm wearing white every day. Why? Because I don't have a period anymore. And then month 11, your period comes back. You got to start all over again. So it has to be 12 consecutive months. No spotting, no breakthrough bleeding, nothing. Or 365 consecutive days. At day 366, throw yourself a party.
I've heard of perimenopause only from the things that I see in like Sex and the City, but those depictions in media don't look like me. What depictions have you seen of menopause in media? Do they feel accurate to you? And what depictions do you hope to see?
So the depictions that I've seen in media, and I think about like the full breadth of what I've seen, have typically been angry, sweaty, confused, white, cis, hetero women. And that's the predominant character, predominant archetype. When you think about movies or TV shows, that's what you see. Very rarely, it's just been recently where you started to see Black women or other women of color who are clearly menopausal. You know, I think about Anjanou Ellis's character in Lovecraft Country, Hippolyta. Hippolyta was definitely a menopausal woman. Anjanou and I are about 4 years apart in age. It was the first time I saw a brown-skinned Black woman in my age group with a menopausal body. She's thick, she's juicy, and she's the smartest person on this show. And I just love that representation of this complicated, dynamic character. I think we have a long way to go, but I think we're starting to get there. There are certain folk who are pushing the conversation and pushing the narrative. Tracy Ellis Ross, I've heard her talk about it several times, and I really, really love the way she is framing who she is now as a woman in her 50s. Taraji P. Henson has talked about her experiences. Gabrielle Union has talked about her experiences, but these are people with star power, right? This is not the sister who's working at Cato's. That's not them. So like, where do those people find a story that reflects their journey, reflects their identity, that resonates with them? And I think that what we are trying to do is to create a container for all of those voices and stories to live fully. I
mean, I know this is cliche, but like, representation matters. Why is storytelling such an important part?
Stories have a way of humanizing data. Stories have a way of making a particularly thorny political issue accessible. Stories have a way of connecting us to each other. You know, one of the first things I learned in 1995 when I started doing social justice work was about popular education. And popular education is based on Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, right? How do you support oppressed or marginalized people in their political activation to do something about their circumstance, to do something that is not just liberatory for them as an individual, but for the collective? You start with story. You don't start with this big kind of like lofty political meta-analysis and be like, let's talk about the political implications. No, 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 no. Tell me your story. Tell me who you are, Chi. Tell me what's important to you. Tell me about what makes you happy. And then you get to share your story with other people. And then you start to see where there are connections and where your stories diverge. And then what happens is when you do that, people start asking questions. Well, why is it that I feel safe and you don't feel safe? Like, what are the things that make you feel unsafe in this community? Well, then we should do something about that. And then that's when the organizer says, yes, we should do something about that. What do you want to do?
Why is it so important for Black folks to have our very own survival guide to menopause?
Well, I think everybody deserves their own survival guide. I am a Black woman. I was a Black girl, so I'm going to do something that resonates with me first. There have been people who are like, you mean all girls? I was like, of course I mean all girls, but I'm talking, you're looking at me, right? I'm Black. So I'm going to talk about myself first, and then I'm going to talk about my community. And I think that we elevate some very accessible universal truths, and we are also like vigilant about the nuance and the complexity of our Blackness and what it means as a Black person to experience it. We just took a trip to the UK back in March and had 2 really fantastic events in partnership with this lovely, lovely, lovely sister named Karen Author. She has a platform called Menopause Whilst Black. And it was like wildly diasporic. We had the Igbo, we had the Yoruba, we had the Ghanaians, we had the Guyanese, we had the Jamaicans. It was just like all of our cousins. It was like Black ass cousins. Everybody's just like, it was fantastic. And we got to see where our journeys were similar and where our journeys were different. And the most important thing is we got to talk to each other, to be in this intergenerational space with each other and talk about our bodies and like how it's different for us and what's important to us and what we need. And I just fell in love with these sisters. They were just magnificent. And we're going to be doing that again in New York. We're going to do it again in Toronto. We're going to do it again in Puerto Rico, because I'm very clear that inside of the diaspora, there's all this connective tissue for us. And there's also ways that we're different. And so how do we like lean into how we're similar and how do we honor how we're different?
What can we do to amplify stories of Black menopause experiences?
I think the first thing is to start having conversations inside your own family, with your own, the people that you love, inside of your friendship circles and inside of your home. Last year, we partnered with a company called Kendra, and we created a deck called Say More. And the Say More deck has 100 discussion cards. And then like there are a lot of people who play these dating games or crimes against humanity or whatever. So it's like these different games that you can ask a question and the whole group gets to kind of ponder the question. We wanted to give folk access to something like that, but also a tool that they could use as a journal prompt or as a personal kind of like individualized journey. So it's broken into the 4 elements from nature. So fire, water, air, and earth. And then each element has like 5 themes, and then you just shuffle the deck and you pull a card, and you can either, like, you and I could answer the question together, or you could use that question in the morning with your meditation and be like, I'm just going to kind of like hold this question with me all day, because the questions rotate around your understanding of your identity, your relationship with your body, and aging and menopause and midlife. So it's really diverse. One of my favorite stories is I have a friend here in North Carolina who was using the deck to have a conversation with her grandmother and her aunt. But her grandfather was ear hustling the conversation. And the question came up about, are you experiencing pleasure? Like, how do you experience pleasure currently at your age? And her grandmother was like, oh yeah, I definitely experience pleasure right now. And then her grandfather was like, oh yeah, because we're having sex on a regular basis and it's good. And my friend was like, okay, I'm not sure I have to know that my grandparents were getting it on, but I'm glad they are, and I'm glad it's good. And then the next thing she knows, the conversation went from her grandmother, her auntie, to her grandmother, her auntie, her grandfather, and her husband. So it became this really beautiful conversation around pleasure and intimacy in an intergenerational way that she did not expect. She's like, I did not expect to be having sex conversations with my grandparents. I said, shout out to your grandparents having good sex in their 70s.
What's something that you like to talk about or you don't get asked often?
So I love movies and I love documentaries. So I think sometimes people don't talk to me about pop culture. My sons and I, we watch all kinds of movies all the time. We're a Marvel family. I will nerd out on you and be like, well, what's the origin story? Like, I want to know everybody's origin story. Well, what happened? Where'd they come from? And why did that happen to them? And why, not every villain started off as a villain. And are they actually a villain? Like, I love the complexity of the stories and be like, I'm not sure if Magneto was a villain. I think Magneto has some misplaced aggression. I think that he was clear about who he was trying to protect, and he was willing to go to the extreme. And we see this in society play itself out, where people have felt so unsafe and have experienced generational trauma, and they're like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna keep my people safe, and you do you, but if you come over here, we got something for you. And I understand that. And it wasn't until we learned Magneto's origin story, you're like, this man got mad PTSD and trauma. He needs some therapy. Magneto needed some therapy.
He said he got superpowers, and it's like, well,
you know what? I got superpowers, screw therapy. I'm just going to let y'all have it. And so I love that kind of discourse and conversation where you get to kind of tease out all of the implications of it and like what you see. We just talked about Queen Charlotte and all of the narratives that are packed inside this story. The narratives around Black-white relations, the narrative around the monarchy, the narrative around mental health. And it was just like, oh, this is so good. And so what me and my nerdy ass friends do? We unpack it. We're like, so what did you see? And you're like, oh, I love this and I love that and this, da, 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 da. And that's kind of like, I don't get asked that a lot. That tends to exist inside of my friendship circles and definitely with my boys. Like we do that all the time. We're always talking about that. My youngest son and I had this whole kind of like conversation about Medusa and how she got a bad rap and how the patriarchy problematized Medusa and her sisters. I was like, yes, young man, you better have an analysis. He's like, the patriarchy is the reason why she got her head cut off. I was like, that's right.
I have a tattoo of Medusa because I love her story.
Right.
And the fact that she is villainized, but there's like 3 different versions of this story and nobody pays attention to the others where she is the actual victim.
That's right. That is right, Chi. A lot of people don't know she was a survivor of sexual assault, and then Athena, who was real messy.
And jealous because of her beauty.
Jealous and messy.
Yep.
And the fact that Perseus killed her while she was asleep. So again, I'm nerding out. So this is what I love.
I am here with you. If you had a neon sign, what would it say?
If I had a neon sign, it would say, welcome to the menopausal multiverse. All are welcome here.
Okay. Omisade has been featured in numerous outlets, including Oprah Daily, Forbes, Vogue, The Washington Post, and now here with us on Tumblr. I'm so happy that you can join us to share about your mission, who you are, the things that bring you joy. Where can people find you?
You can find us on our website, www.Black Girls Guide to Surviving Menopause, or you can check us out on IG. We're Black Girls Guide to Menopause on Instagram, or Omisade Burney-Scott on Instagram. And we're also on Twitter at Oshun Sweet and Sour. That's OSUN Sweet and Sour.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. See you guys next time on Black and Excellent.